I'm Justin Evangelo. This is Disenabled, the podcast where we enable people with physical disabilities. Happy to be back for another episode after so long, hiatus taken because of personal reasons. You're probably wondering as well what the heck this podcast even is, and it'll become a little bit more apparent in the coming weeks as I consistently release more content. This podcast is simply an education and advocacy tool to educate anyone and everyone about physical disability, or in this case, because of a Remembrance Day special, PTSD and other cognitive ailments that go along with it. And that's basically the gist. I don't want to ramble too much. I want to dive right into the meat and potatoes, the main portion of the content of this episode. I caught up with two ex-military soldiers who served in the armed forces, and their career spans collectively from 1985 all the way to 2011, so they have a vast wealth of experience. And even though it's nothing to do with the world wars, I think that a modern take on PTSD, Remembrance Day as a concept as a whole, is a little bit more, let's say, relatable. And I thought it would be a little bit of a different change of pace to ask the quote-unquote hard questions. They were incredibly open. I can't thank them enough, but I'll save my gratitude for the outro of the podcast. Without further ado, enjoy. All right, here we are. I am talking to two ex-military soldiers. Do I have that right? I don't want to butcher your guys' titles right off the bat. Lisa Marie and Glenn are their first names. And let's start with you, Lisa Marie. What was your official title in the armed forces?
I was a corporal. For 8 years, I was medical assistant, and the remaining 8 years of a 16-year career was traffic tech.
And Glenn, what was your title?
Okay, I was also, I finished as a corporal. I served 10 years as a combat infantryman with the Royal Canadian Regiment.
And for context, I should ask, because I don't even know, did the two of you serve around the same time?
No,
that's funny. Actually, I served from 85 to 95. And Lisa,
I served from 95 to 2011.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, Lisa Marie, you're way fresher out of the ranks than Glenn is.
Yeah.
You know, I'm always curious. We'll hit the ground and start running, but, slow context at the groundwork. Lisa Marie, what inspired you? What was the catalyst behind joining the military? Because I've talked to a lot of people, some peacekeepers, some soldiers, who have vastly different reasons, let's call them, for joining.
So for me, I guess it was defiance against my mother.
All right. I like where this is headed already.
So I was 12 years old and I had some friends that were doing cadets. And my mother told me that this is something I could never be able to do because I couldn't clean my bedroom. And I said, really? Is that a challenge? So I started cadet at 12. And I arrived first in the inspection, my summer camp. So proving my mother that I could make a bed better than everybody else. It's just that I didn't want to do it at home. But that's how it started. And then I got like the adventure with the cadets. So that's really where it started for 5 years till I was 17. It was always about like, just it was very adventurous, and I could see like being in the military, it was going to be a lot of traveling, a lot of adrenaline, and that's really what got me into it.
Glenn, why did you decide to serve?
Well, there's probably a couple of reasons. One, there's a bit of military history in my family, mostly from my mother's side, but like my aunts or my uncles and my grandfather. I have one uncle who stormed the beaches of D-Day. I have another uncle who fought in Korea, actually with the same regiment I was in. But I also always consider myself a patriot. And I remember I had to write an essay when I was recruited and to say why I wanted to join. And I said, well, every day in school we stand and we sing the Canadian national anthem. And we always sing Stand on Guard for Thee. And I thought, I want to be one of those that stands on guard for thee. I actually want to do it, and I just sing it. And that was part of my motivation. And the adventure.
Well, yeah, of course. That's a really interesting catalyst. And again, two vastly different paths. Has the recruiting process from when you joined Glenn in 85 all the way to Lisa Marie when you left the ranks, has it drastically changed?
I think it's pretty much stayed the same.
Yeah. Because we've known other people recently who tried the process, and it's pretty standard. Your medical,
aptitude tests, physical tests.
And you have to go through all the category through your interview, and then whatever position you want, whatever field you want to go, and whatever you're qualified for based on all your testing, then when the trade opens, they just call you and you start, right? I think it's more like the waiting time that's always a bit different based on, I heard is based on like conflict. When there's like international conflict, recruitment goes up in Canada. People are like, hey, yeah, that would be a cool thing. But when we're at peace, there's less mention of any military involvement. It looks like, recruiting is a bit harder. So it could be easier to join in based on demand, right?
That's probably why it's dropping off right now.
Yeah.
Because there isn't any conflict, which I assume does make a little bit of sense. And I've always been curious, because I'm going to ask you about as many stereotypes as I possibly can in this.
Sure.
Is military, well, I'm pretty sure I know the answer, just not to what degree. When people think of military training, obviously they think of weapons training, hand-to-hand, blades, guns, that kind of stuff. How much more is there in your training than weapons training? And how much, if you had to put a percent on it, is weapons traiing?
Well, I think that depends on the trade, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Like for myself,
and the mission,
that you go on. Yeah. But for myself, for combat infantry, it's everything you can imagine, like everything you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. Other trades, obviously, less so. Well, Lisa Marie can talk about that.
Well, as a medic, you because you're involved with some regulation in the Red Cross. Basically, we're under different oaths, so we have different form of training when it comes to involvement in protecting your position, right? But also, like as a female, when I was in Afghanistan, we had to learn how to inspect other female, because there's not a lot of those. So there's like whatever is involved in combat is really like appropriate to. It has to be UN. It has to be approved by the United Nations, like especially the type of weapons. And I'm not a specialist, so I can't say much. Like there's a lot of assumption. But like for what I know is it has to be regulated through UN for the amount of force we put. And this is all part of our training. So that's why it's always different. Like when you're with UN, Glenn had a certain level of rule of engagement. And with NATO, I had different ones, right? So it's always changing. There's a whole shoot in the middle. Right?
Basic training is basically just basic weapons.
It changed based on where you're going and why you're going there and the amount of force you're allowed to put in.
Yeah.
That's entirely understandable. When you were in the 80s, Glenn, I'm just trying to run through a basic history of conflict. Obviously, there was the situation with Bosnia. I know peacekeepers got involved with Rwanda in the 90s as well around that time. Was there any time that there wasn't an armed conflict where you were in? And if so, what did you do? How do soldiers spend their time when they're actually not boots on the ground?
Well, I actually spent 5 years in Germany for the Cold War.
Right. Okay. Didn't think about that. See, there we go.
Yeah. And I was over in Germany from 88 to 93 when we closed the bases. I was actually in Germany when the Berlin Wall came down and everything changed. But most of the time, it's training. Even when we were in Germany and we're like frontline in case the Russians attack, type thing, the whole war. It's training, going to different American bases, British bases, and it's just live fire training, blank training, vehicle training. We run courses constantly where you train people to use vehicles, to use radios, to use things like that. Yeah, it's just constant.
And it's interesting because you're a trait that's not applicable unless there's a wartime, or unless there's a conflict. Being in in arm, like especially when we come, like that's it. It's infantry, right?
Yeah.
So as a medic and as a traffic tech, I had to deal with. I had to offer services,
Yes,
like any cooks. I always call the military like a little village, right? We have our own lawyers, our own cooks, our own nurse, our own everything, and we're a system by itself that can self serve, right? So it's I'm learning, I'm taking course, but at the same time, if Glenn were to be sick, he has to show at the hospital. We have a military hospital. I'm always practical. I'm always in serving in that compared to
we're basically only utilized when we go on mission.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is there some comfort for either or both of you in living in that ecosystem for as long as you each did, that structure?
Well, I really enjoyed the camaraderie. Camaraderie. I can't think of the word. Camaraderie with my buddies, which I still miss, I think. And there was a lot to that, because when you're with guys like 24/7 for 6 months at a time, you get to really know people almost better than your own family type thing. So no, it's comfortable. I know where your question is coming from. Like it's a comfortable system, paychecks coming, everything is standard across everywhere you go. When you think about food is ready. When you think about quarters, your quarters are ready. If I have to go to a course down west, it's like, take this train, here's everything you need to know, and this is where your quarters are going to be for that amount of time. And so it's very prepared. So it is kind of nice, but well, there's a large variety too. Generally, like no 2 days are the same. Because
that's really interesting. I actually was going to ask that as a sort of a segue into my next question. Does it ever get boring?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so it does. All right.
It's a lot of hurry up and wait. Right.
Gotcha.
That's still saying hurry up and wait. But like I said, like the variety though, because after I got to the military, I did work in some factories, and you go into the factory, you watch the machine run for 8 hours, and then you go home, and it's the same thing every day. Where in the military, it's never the same thing every day.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that? What do you mean that it's like you're never doing the same task?
Oh, like you might be training on vehicles for a week, and then another week you're out on the range, and then another week on a course, and then it's just,
and then after that there's nothing, right? So they ask you to wash the same vehicle every day for like a month, and you're like, okay, I'm pretty sure that vehicle is clean. Can you?
We call those make work projects.
Make work.
Busy work, make work, whatever you want to call them.
And just be sitting around.
And I mean, my experience is different because, even when I was at the hospital, there's always patient. So you're always learning. It's like working in the hospital environment. Sometimes, it's kind of a routine and gets in till they're like, okay, we need volunteers for this. And then you realize like there's, a bigger project or something different. Or
and then you get voluntold.
There's voluntold time too. You're like, why am I doing this, right?
I need 3 volunteers, you and you.
But like,
really.
So I guess I was more busy as a medic. It was more like constant, just like a nurse would be at a hospital, versus when I was working more in the transport and logistic as a traffic tech. Then it's like, okay, you have 3 plane, and then so it's like go, and then the next day it's like, okay, there's no plane or there's 1, and all the loads have been ready, so you're doing nothing for 12 hours. So but that's a basic rule in transportation and logistic, right? There's days that are busier than others. So,
and you never know what's going to happen. Like we used to do bug outs where they call you at 3:00 in the morning, and you have to go in full kit and be ready to roll type thing. And when we were in Germany, it was full. Like you're rolling out into the community in armored vehicles and setting up.
I think one thing we have a tendency, because it's been like. When was your last day in the military? Like 20-ish years? You're like, wait a second. Like there's your training time that is very filled. Like your basic training at the beginning, or your and there's like the every day after that. It's just like, when you're on training mode or when you're in training course, especially when, you have to show up, like it's like, go, go, go. You do a lot of drills and it's very busy and they keep you after hours. And sometimes you work like 12 hours, 15 hours, or you're in the field or, like 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay. We practice attack at 3 o'clock in the morning. Like it's constant. And you're like, you come out of there exhausted. But there's also like, that's it. There's days it's like, I show up at 8, I got my coffee. Hi, Serge. And
run of the mill, like a like a standard
like a
9 to 5
normal life, right?
Yeah, type.
Like you're not on
situation.
that adrenaline rush constantly. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. Like they put you in rush, but then after that, you have some leaves, so you're at home. You can kind of get organized and get your system reorganized, and your everything, and then you just carry on like a civilian. I want to say it's just like you have a combat, but like a lot of people are. They work in Ottawa, like it's 8 to 4, but they don't have to wear a suit. They're just working in a combat. We used to call it the PJ, right? The big green PJ. They go to work, right? So,
with usually hand in hand, there's usually a let's call it a stigma of a lot of excessive alcohol usage in the military. Is that something that both of you were exposed to?
Well, not excessive, but I think definitely a lot more than there is now. It was more acceptable, maybe not to the point like excess like you might be mentioning, but there was probably
there was a culture where after a hard week, everybody would meet at the mass, and I think that's part of the camaraderie that was developed over the years. Is everybody on Friday, big weekend and then we just go and have fun.
I know with the infantry, it's a matter of like work hard, play hard. But
I've heard that more than once thrown around when it comes to not specifically infantry, but military, and that leads me to an interesting point as well. Where has there been a shift in the usage of drinking? I want
to separate like the military portion from alcohol or drug usage, because those are, I would say, like related to mental health issues, and we can't deny at this point, even with the media has been able to present it, so it's not like we can't talk about it. It's that with stress, with PTSD, there is people do find comfort in alcohol, and just like the civilian. And they self-medicate through, with substances. So I can understand where my peers that have been, subject to a lot of stress, just like police officer, just like anybody who wears a uniform, that is, at some point reach a point of no return, going, I'm having a hard time coping with the amount of stress in my life. And it's not like that's it. Our job is not an easy 8 to 4. It is filled with a lot of stress and stressors in our family and stressors in our environment that sometimes lead to those behavior, just like any of the trades that I'm thinking about, like that's it, police officers or
anyone putting themselves in a situation or a profession, and it's where a fight or flight
response. You're constantly in fight or flight response. Where's the danger? Where's the danger? Where's the danger? And then you end up, in a position where it's hard, right? Your brain can go so far as to accepting stressors.
Right.
I personally haven't heard of any mainstream therapeutic techniques to, let's say, integrate back into civilian life. Is there anything that you two know about where that's made available to not just ex-military, but anybody who's gone into a profession where they're in a constant state of alertness, where you can not turn it on and off, but make it a little bit more manageable and not be on high alert constantly about every little thing in your situation? Say you're, at Tim's having a coffee and something like the beeper goes off for the sandwiches or something like that. And you think, oh, take cover.
and I want to emphasize on one thing about that. It's not necessarily like military related or anything, or like I said, like it could be also trauma. You could be in a car accident as a civilian, and then your brain chemistry goes on and off, and you're in a like you said, in constant alert mode, right? So you can be, or children with high trauma develops their brain into, always being very reactive. and you have a lot of behavior issues, in that, or, being in poverty will create those mental health issues.
No doubt.
Also,
You
right?
hear about it all the time.
So many, that's it, poverty, and when you add up all these things, we have a big spectrum of population that deals with mental health. Where they go from that, between therapy, or I know right now people have a tendency to think about marijuana as the one of the manageable, and then we heard now there's like mushrooms are coming over as another tool to manage like your fight or flight response. Basically, I want to call it like that, right? Because a lot of people can understand that principle of the brain going, I can't self-regulate and I need help, right? But meditation, what is that? CBT,
cognitive behavioral therapy.
There you go.
Yeah, you got it. You got the acronym right. Yeah.
EMDR.
EMDR is another one. There's a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah.
There's so many things that I think
they're constantly finding new methods.
Mm-hmm.
There's one with sounds, and you put on a headset or something that plays sounds.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it's called. Ecotherapy or something like that. I can't remember.
No, funny. I need to read about that.
I'm definitely gonna look more into that too. That's because that's not a new idea, to use tones to alter emotional response, because the brain is a powerful thing. It's obviously very fragile.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
I'm going to take an opposite approach with this question. Do you think that there's a risk? Even, I'm not saying that talking about PTSD and it's linked to the military, Lisa Marie, I know you said, separate, it's not just, but there is a theme to this conversation. Do you think that there's a problem with talking about PTSD and soldiers coming back with it too much and sort of glorifying it, where it's like the tortured hero?
Like the way the media is presenting it, and everybody's personal approach is different. I mean, I cannot talk about in the military, but there's like veterans. I've seen some people. You're right. I've seen some people doing it. I've seen some people just going in their basement and just ignoring it. I think how people respond to that, but. I mean, there are a lot of civilian that tries to take a voice for the veteran, and that sometimes we disagree with some people deciding what's best for a veteran without really understanding, mental health, or without being a professional. And then whatever, people love their soldiers. Like, we can't deny that. It's part of our history. It's part of our pride. And I think people responding to that, right? Yeah. I think it's balance. I think it's trying to create balance.
I think a lot of times, like mostly from the civilian side, they kind of portray it as like the tortured hero. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that like Lisa Marie said, I'm sure there's military people that embrace that themselves. Oh, I'm the tortured hero. I earned my PTSD and all this. You hear that, and it's very seldom, but
it's kind of rare. You see them,
very rare,
but they're not going anywhere with that.
No.
So I think it's go ahead.
Everyone will deal with it differently, and whether you're again soldier or not, but you have those outliers, and then if you want to talk stereotypes, let's say unfortunately. The prevalence of suicide.
I think I don't want to mix like this in military with the pandemic, but at the same time, people have found a safe haven and home, and I think there is a shift in society in that matter.
It's like you said before. You don't want the pendulum to sway completely the other way, where you're talking about it so much that it's becoming a badge of honor to be so. No. Twisted inside, and woe is me, but I'm not gonna take any action to fix myself.
I'm gonna tell you a story that was funny. At the time, I can't help but being sad and smile at the same time, realizing the impact. General Romeo Dallaire have made a book called Shake Hands with the Devil.
I love that book. I've read it.
Yeah, beautiful book. So, and I was a very, very young medic. We're talking like 1 or 2 years in. and probably maybe a little bit more. But I was a young medic in Montreal, and he had just been found on the bench, drunk, almost dead. But we didn't know who he was at the time. And it was all over the news. So they took us aside, and they decided to talk about, a general that had been found, and you could see people being frustrated. You saw people being, like, how is people are going to perceive us now that we, one of our top, somebody that we look up to was in such distress, and everybody had a different perspective on it. And that day kind of went off in my mind till I read the book. And then when I finished the book, and I never realized that was the man. I was reading the book, that it was the man in that day, because I was frustrated. My first response at the time is I was frustrated. I'm like, how can I have a successful career if our top general have a hard time keeping it together? Because that was my understanding. I had absolutely no training and understanding of mental health. And we're talking only 20 years ago. I had, as a medical assistant in the military, I had no training in mental health, or very, very little, that I did not understand how could that happen. And now, so I think this is the pendulum, is we've never talked about it. The first time we actually heard about the concept of post-traumatic stress disorder from combat, because before that it was called shell shock, was with that general. He had that diagnosis, and he started coming it true. And that's why I read the book. And then on the last page, when you said, and on that day when I was found on the bench, I threw the book, and I got very, very angry, and I started crying in anger. And I said, wow, 10 years ago, I have judged that man, and now he's my hero. How can I have such a switch in 10 years as an individual about perceiving mental health? And I think that's why people are like, we need to talk about it. We need to talk about it. We need to talk about it. And people are talking over and over and over again, almost to make it acceptable. And I do you know where I'm coming from with that? Like,
exactly, it goes back
from coming to looking at him as like almost disgraceful member to my hero, going, he overcome all this, and he's talking about it. And then realizing after that, I'm like, wait a second, I actually served with his son. And then making all those connections later. And I'm like, wow, I really, really, really need to take a strong, positive, healthy stand on mental health. Understanding that I was, even as a medical assistant, I was judgmental of that effect.
It goes back to what you were talking about too, with not having anyone speak for you. You know what I mean? A good thing about Dallaire was, if you read that book, that's him. He went through a tortuous process right after coming back home from Rwanda. If you read the preface or the intro, he shelved it, and a lot of people had to help, pick him up and help motivate him to do it. But at the end of the day, he's speaking for himself with that. And that seems to be the issue as well. You talk about media and mainstream outlets talking for veterans like the two of you, and that's not what you want.
Well, what I feel, that's it. Like you said, it's not bottling it up to a point of explosion, and then it becomes you, because you're only this, because that's been accumulated inside of your body for so long that it consumed you. Yeah. So I can see where somebody is like, I am PTSD. This is what has been happening. Maybe sometimes some people have childhood issues or other form of trauma outside the military, that it consumes them to a point of not being able to identify themselves. That's how I feel. That's just a feeling. That's just my idea on how, and that's just one individual. Other people are like, no, I'm doing good with all my traumas. I can self-regulate properly, or I'm emotionless, and to a point of not being healthy at all. Yeah. Right. But everybody, I think it's removing. It's always about removing that stigma.
Yeah.
And I mean, we both got diagnosed with post-traumatic stress with the experience we've come through the military. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was in I was in Bosnia and then I went to Afghanistan twice, and my nerve was so thin from being constantly under the dress of fight or flight mode that I was just completely, my brain was exhausted, just constantly exhausted. And then you're like, okay. And then people have judged me. They're like, you can't wake up in the morning. What's wrong with you? I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't comprehend that my body refused just to get up and go get breakfast or go take a shower.
There's no switch there that you can, turn on and off.
No,
you're drained. So there was a time in my life where when you got diagnosed, it consumes you. Yeah. You're like, I am it. This is it. This is me not being able to brush my teeth because I'm just looking at the brush. I'm like, this is another chore. Like everything has become so exhaustive that you just want to sit and almost want to die. That's where I think that the suicide, you just want to give up because you're like, I'm nothing from being so much active.
Yeah, because you have no quality of life at that point.
Exactly.
It's so interesting to have a little bit of it's actually a huge identity crisis from the way it's been framed. How do you go about what's even the first step from just picking yourself up from that state where you're something as basic as Lisa Marie, you just said, brushing your teeth seeming like a chore, something that a lot of people take for granted. How do you go about pushing through that? Is it always professional help that's needed?
Well, it definitely helps. You develop strategies. I was saying through therapy, you develop definite strategies, how to self-care. Well, there's two things that I've learned, self-care and self-nurture. And a lot of people say self-care, take a walk, do this. No, that's not self-care. Self-care is having a shower, brushing your teeth, getting dressed, getting out of bed, actually doing.
Take off your PJ. Yeah.
Self-nurturing is going for a walk, reading a book, doing a hobby. And the one thing we always learned is self-care is what you do to survive, and self-nurture is what you do to thrive.
I like that.
And that's what you need to learn. You need to learn to thrive to have that quality of life. But the self-care is also very important because you don't have a lot of quality of life when you haven't showered in 3 days or brushed your teeth or even ate a solid meal and just sitting on the couch doing nothing because you feel paralyzed.
Yeah.
Because that's basically it. You feel paralyzed by, depending what your symptoms are. Like for me, it's hypervigilance and things like that. So it can be very paralyzing. But you develop strategies over time on how to move forward. And as you get stronger and stronger, then you're able to do more and more things type thing. Because I know myself, I've come a long way. I was first diagnosed in 97.
Wow.
And my tour was actually in 92. So I went 5 years undiagnosed and not even knowing what was going on. But back in those days, there was no mention of PTSD. There was no clinics. There was nothing. Nobody even knew what it was. It was just, there's something wrong with me. That's it. And you just deny it for years and years and years until you're like, okay, I can't maintain this anymore.
Yeah.
I need some help. That's the biggest step, asking for help.
Yeah.
How do you go about healthily encouraging research from 92 to 2021? That isn't a lot of time in the grand scheme of things. And it's amazing to see how much devotion social science, in particular psychology, has dumped its time into studying this, again, for military personnel and beyond. How do you encourage healthy ways of researching it without glorifying it? As obviously you're advocating as, two ex-soldiers. How do you go about doing it?
Well, I feel that the first step is normalizing it. One day we're going to normalize it, and it's going to be just like autism, just like any other disability that's out there, because it is a disability. It is a disorder. It's post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of people are trying to qualify or rebranding it as a post-traumatic injury and instead of a disorder, because they feel that it's different spectrum. So there's and that's the thing. So mental health, I feel like we're stuck in a word. And I try to study a lot like mental health for children. So sometimes I can relate in terms, like it's all based on trauma, right? Where's your brain stop working? And it fascinates me, right? Because it's really understanding where people are going. But I think all these words sometimes that we put on disability becomes I am it. And without, and it's the end of it. Like, it's like, okay, and then we can take a pill and then fix it. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, let's go back to, redefining who you are, not necessarily through a uniform or through a disability. Anybody who, or your sexual orientation, anything. I just want to be. I just want to be free of just being me and being normalized, whatever my appearance or my values or who I am. So I think we have so much work, especially like I know I'm branching out, but it's so important to normalize how people are and be, trauma or not, or. Well,
I was going to say, I think one big aspect is the stigma. That is the hugest aspect, because the thing is, if somebody's saying that because of post-traumatic stress, they're hypervigilant, they can't focus, they have memory issues, therefore they can't work, they're considered weak. Mm-hmm. But if a veteran lost his arm, he's not considered weak. He's considered disabled, but he's not considered weak. But if it's your mind, you're considered weak.
Yeah. And
that's a stigma.
Yeah. And
we've got to get past that, because that's what stops also a lot of people looking for help, because of the stigma.
And that's it. What's the difference between a veteran who has lost his marble during the war and one that lost his leg, right? Like they both lost something. They're both mourning. We are mourning a healthy brain, a healthy process with our brain, like a healthy way to live. We are in the mourning process when we discover that we are different, and a lot of people cannot accept that. Just like people have, mourning different things, and it could be a limb, it could be a certain ability.
Well, they've also actually have proven that it is an actual physical injury in the amygdala of your brain. Mm-hmm. It does physically alter it.
Physiologically, yeah.
So that you are hypervigilant, that it doesn't switch off. The switch stays on, and that's it. So like my hypersensitive, am I in danger switch has been on since 1992. Type thing, and it won't turn off. And that is actual physical. They've proved it through brain scans and everything, that there is a physical difference. It is an injury that creates a disorder.
Yep.
So, it's both. It's an injury and a disorder.
I think it's hard, because if you just concentrate on you, then because you're trying to heal yourself, you become almost like a bit of a narcissistic, self-centered. It's like, I'm trying to figure out like what's my in, what's my out, what's my new me, and then you need a strong group of people around you to be able to say, we'll take care of everybody, of everything else around you, paying your bills or this or that, while you just concentrate on finding your new normal. And that's the thing, finding your new normal. And how can you still thrive or find the quality of life through that? But trying to do this when you have a toddler running around, or your bills are not paid because your spouse lost her job, it's hard. So all the factors around that makes it sometimes, well, let's stop your PTSD and let's deal with everything else around. So it's always accumulating till sometimes things explode. And so you need to have the proper environment, and it's not everybody. Sometimes poverty is an issue, because when you become a veteran, you enter in a time that you don't have a salary anymore. And if you don't have a spouse that has a salary that can sustain a quality of life, then you end up with, other stressors that lead you not to be able to take care of yourself. So you need all those factors to say, I'm gonna sit with myself and start thinking and admitting I have an issue, being okay, accepting it. So those are like my steps. It's like, yes, I am wounded. Yes, I cannot function anymore the way, because you find pride in saying, oh, I can bungee jump and I can do all these things, right? And sometimes it's like, no, I can't do all these things anymore because of physical and mental injury. So now, and I have to be okay with that. I have to find new things to make myself happy again.
You adjust.
And find happiness. And that takes years. It takes years.
Can part of the reintegration be found in some of the tasks when you're on the road to integrating back into life as a civilian? You mentioned if you have a child, taking care of them. Or is it, as you say, sort of this needs to be taken care of above my PTSD, so let's sweep it under the rug until it becomes a mound and I trip over it and break my neck, so to speak, metaphorically.
That's what happened to me. Yeah. That's why I went 5 years without doing anything, and then it's like, now I have to do something because it's
the breaking point.
Hit a breaking point. Yeah. And that's happened to me actually, I think about 3 times in my life that I've kind of hit a breaking point and had to step back and get some help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and what's the good news about this is that there are resources.
Yeah.
There are organization, there are different places you can go for a month, or there is support. You can, if sometimes you have to wait, sometimes it could be expensive, but there's a lot of things that are free that you can start looking up and say, this is what I have to implement. This is what, and I am a big advocate that go for a walk and eat healthy food. Start with that.
Yep.
Brush your teeth, make your bed, brush your teeth, eat fruits, like eat something healthy, just one. You can eat chips the rest of the day, but if you can have just one apple, start with that. Start with one apple a day, like something very small. That
baby
you say,
steps for sure. Yeah.
I've made my bed. I got dressed. I brushed my teeth, and I had one fruit. Okay, and then it starts to go slowly. It's not like, and it takes a long time. Sometimes it takes medication. Sometimes, for the most part, I think with everybody that had severe post-traumatic stress, I've heard they had to medicate. Yeah. They had to medicate to get their brain at a certain normalcy, almost like blocking everything that would make you out of scale of being able to be rational and make good decision, to be able to say, okay, I can sustain that. I'm not, but it's not for life. No. It's just till you find your pattern. Exactly. And I mean, Glenn found like leather work, and then went off all the medication and say, okay, I can do this. I can take care of one child and do leather work, and we do some horseback riding, do a couple of exercise here and there, and then we bicycle during the summer. We always take walks, and then I found other things.
Another common, let's call it stereotype if you want to, I've heard from soldiers, mostly single guys coming home after being stationed somewhere, is, man, I just feel like I have no purpose. Is that part and parcel of what we're talking about here? And like, how do you go about, being a soldier and knowing what your role is to being thrust out into, let's call it, a world where you've got to carve really try to at times carve a name for yourself?
I can really relate to that because I really identified as a soldier. And when I left the military, I left on my own accord, but they did say in later years that I would have been granted a medical release at the time for post-traumatic stress, but they weren't doing that at the time. And I really, really struggled for a lot of years with my identity, who I was, because like I said, I was proud to be a soldier. I'm a defender of my country. I'm doing something important. And I've been on the world stage, being in Germany, being in Yugoslavia, being in Sarajevo. I've been in world events, and now I'm standing in a factory painting doors. Like, it just, what is this?
It's a switch. Like,
it's a huge switch.
It's okay for a lot of people, but when that's it. When you're an adrenaline rush type of person, it becomes numbing.
And then I took another big hit when I'd gone for like an 8-week course, a post-traumatic stress recovery program, and they advised me that I was no longer capable to work after that. And that was a big hit to my
self-esteem
and who I am, because now I don't even do anything. that's why I did end up working for a while with the search and rescue and everything, because I was looking for something to do. I had like something important, something to help.
Meaningful. Yeah.
You know, a purpose.
And I mean, you think about the type of people that are attracted to the military, like it is even like in recruiting images and videos, you can see it. It's like, you know, people are running and they're jumping and they're like, there's lasers everywhere. And it's like, wow, you know, it's you are the type of person that looks for excitement, that looks for an adrenaline rush. So when it doesn't get feed into you, you're like, but who I am now. You know, even now, sometimes I got myself, I look at those videos and I'm like, yeah, I want to go for a run. I miss it, right? Like, oh, I want to go back. And I'm like, no, I'm 45. My knees are done. My back is done. My neck is done.
And then I get off the couch and go, oh, my back.
Oh, yeah, really. Yeah, there's life has a funny way of reminding you that retrospect is not all there is to.
Yeah. I'm going to put my brace if I want to go walk the dog.
Yeah, really. Nothing like ending on a note of laughter on a day that's typically reserved for a wealth of solemnity. Glenn, Lisa Marie, thank you for your service, obviously, but also for your time. The original audio file for this episode was just under 2 hours, and I chopped that into about 40 minutes. No easy feat, let me tell you. If you would like to see or listen to a part 2, I'd be more than willing to oblige. Hit me up, say hello, drop me a line, even if you just want to talk about anything and everything, at disenabled.podcast@gmail.com. Link to that will be in the description of this podcast episode. And regardless of if you celebrate Remembrance Day or if you know it as Veterans Day, I hope you got something out of this conversation. I know I got more than just a little something. I got a whole hell of a lot. To all those veterans still living who came back, thank you for your service. Those who are currently serving, that's one hell of a vocation to take up. So thank you as well. And to play me out, I've got lined up the Royal Australian Air Force's version of The Last Post. You can find the link to this track in the description of this podcast as well. More content to come in the coming weeks. Until next time, cheers.